Oh,
Okay.
yeah, it's Kelly.
Now, I thought that since we got talking about Eric Berne and, how, he tried to take personality theory, kind of apply it to everyday life, even give us a language. And it dawned on me that, we've really gone through a lot of content in this course. I mean, this really is a heavy content course. And one of the things that hopefully would come out of it after you've been, barraged with lots of material, you've done a lot of thinking about, what theories do you think are correct? Probably you will end up finding that there are some things in some theories that I actually think are pretty insightful. And there are other things that I would just discard, that I don't think apply to most people. Maybe most importantly, you feel they don't apply to you. And I think it would be interesting for us, as a group, to talk a bit about, what did we get out of this? That is, what are the concepts that perhaps apply to you, and what are the concepts that you think don't apply to you? And we might get some feeling for, the fact that, in fact, I'm sure we'll learn that some concepts are seen as applying to some people in the class, and others feel they don't apply to me. I thought a safe place to start the discussion in a way might be around what you've learned about parenting. You notice amongst our theorists, I mean, they talk often about children. So you spent a lot of time learning about developmental theory. What, if anything, have you learned that you think would make a difference to you or is important to you about raising children that has come up in these theories? Or else you can volunteer what you think has been posited that you think is not important, actually is wrong.
I would say being very open-minded.
Okay, being open-minded with children.
And being able to accept just about
Okay.
what it seems like.
Okay, very important statement, that one of the things she's saying she has learned is that you really want to be open-minded with your children, be willing to accept just about anything. Okay, that's very good. Sure.
I have a junior high school son, and when you talk about letting them be in that stage, because I used to have a lot of problems with him having to dress like in baggy pants and, with pants almost falling. It's like, I had an issue, and then right now I just kind of, because I know it's the stage that will come and go.
Yes.
And this is what I've gathered from this class.
Okay, that's great. She is saying here she's got a son who's a teenager, and preteens, and he wears baggy pants. He does he dresses the way mom doesn't want him to dress. This is distressing, but, and I think the real insight you have is, this is a phase, and he will not necessarily be this way when he's 35. And the important thing I think that you're saying is it allows you to calm down. It allows you to realize, I don't really like this, but I don't think this is that terrible, especially now that I know, he'll get over it. And that's a very important thing about stages that we've learned, is that people pass through stages, that behavior, unless it's very pathological, is not fixed. And so trying to understand behavior then, in the context of what your child is going through can free you up. Okay, what else? Sure.
I don't have children, but I work with children on a regular basis, and there's a little boy that I've been working with this summer, and the stuff that you talked about, or that any psychology class will talk about, is like the reinforcement and the positive reinforcement versus punishment, because I find myself just telling him no all the time for everything, or I'm going to take this away from you, or I'm going to do that. And theorists all the time tell you to do positive reinforcement, but it's so hard when you actually have a child, and he has autism, so it's even more difficult to find things that really will positively reinforce him. A theorist will tell you, okay, well, you need to do this, and reinforce him positively, but it's so easy to just punish him.
Well, first of all, I think,
no.
well, you're talking, of course, about your interaction with this young child. The child has very significant problems. So, you personally may be very frustrated with the child that you're trying to deal with. Now, in all, relationships like this, there is nothing wrong with trying to set limits. The problem is if all of your energy goes into setting limits, then there isn't any energy to kind of reward the child. And one of the things that you kind of want to have the child experience is, if I set this limit, then there's something you gain from this. Now, with the youngster you're working with, you probably have to do this so repetitively that it becomes very hard.
Well, and when I try to compliment him or tell him, you did really good today, I'm really proud of you today, he blows it off like, I don't really care, it's no big deal. So it's so hard because I'm like, I want to tell you you're doing good.
But here's something that I hope we have all learned. Even though someone says, I don't care, there is no one who doesn't care about being complimented, about being positively reinforced. So that what you might want to read, in that is that the youngster is not ready to get close to you. So now, if the youngster is not ready to get close to you, it may be because he actually feels very close to you, and that's scary. So the way someone keeps a distance is to, to say things that are negative or to push you away. But when you're being pushed away, I think, one of the things hopefully you'll give a lot of thought to is, am I being pushed away because I'm really not desirable? Or am I being pushed away because the other person is simply too frightened of being this close to me? And that's just a question you have to ask, and you have to ask that with children as well as with, intimate partners. That comes up all the time. Sure.
I think it's important when there's more than one sibling or one kid in the family is not to compare the kid with the other siblings and not to compare it to like other children that you know. Because I find that can be like demeaning, and it's frustrating for the kid to be like, I'm not that person, I'm not going to be like them.
Oh yeah, that's great. Yes, that these are all individuals, and you don't want to set one child as the norm for all the other children and say, you should be like so-and-so. You should be like your sister or your brother. Yes, that you really, and of course, any of you who are parents and have unfortunately tried this, know it doesn't work at all. So it's a good thing to be aware of. Yes. Yes.
Me?
Yes.
I have two comments. First, with the past there's Hans. What how do you pronounce his last name? Hans.
Oh, yes.
Isaac.
Isaac, yes.
With him, I think the 80-20 thing about the intelligence.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like that's a bit of a stretch to say 80% is inherited. I don't know. Just me. I just feel like it's a little less than 80%, maybe 60-40 or something. That's just my personal opinion. And as far as Freud's theory goes, like the Oedipus complex,
Yeah.
I really think that's pretty bizarre. I mean, I can kind of understand where he might say, as a young child, you might want to the first part about being sexual with the parent, but it's for him to go to the extreme is making up this whole story. I don't know where he would get it from. I mean, I know a lot of his patients were, sexually abused, but, to go and say you want to castrate, and, I mean, where would he get the whole fairy tale from? I don't
Well, part of it actually came from this myth, Oedipus Rex.
I know the myth, and but how can he, I just...
Well, the way he came up with it, no, I mean, these are good questions. The way he came up with it was, was really to to create what would be the fantasy of a child who, desiring this very intimate contact, would not pursue it. And so the fantasy he had is, well, the child must then fear some negative consequence. And since, he was carrying the metaphor so far because he was focusing everything on the sexual organs, saying like that's where the greatest pleasure is for a male or a female, and this is why one desires it so much. Then, of course, the punishment would be losing the most favored object one has. And so it was, his thesis that it's this great fear that then causes someone to kind of give up that desire and then to move on and behave more socially appropriate. Now, in terms of your thing about iSync, you know, it's a guess in a way. I mean, like you were saying, I think I'd like 60-40 better than 80-20. Probably most of us would like 60-40 better. But what, this is not an absolute kind of thing. But actually what's important in that concept is that what you inherit, that is what you start with, does matter. You know, if someone has very limited intelligence, they will not be able to achieve in the same way that somebody who's born with, let's say, lots of intelligence. So that, you know, and you need to recognize that, you know, when you work, especially if you're, you know, those of you who are teachers, and if you work with children who are retarded, it's not that they can't learn. They can learn. But can they learn at the same pace as someone their age? Probably not. There's some fascinating research, by the way, around this concept, you know, of mental age rather than physical age. And some of the research shows if you take a child who is 7 chronologically, and they're 5 mentally, and you try to teach them things that you expect a 7-year-old to learn, they can't do it. I mean, they fail at that. But if you start looking at them as a 5-year-old, and you think about what would be appropriate for a child at 5 to learn, you find that they can learn at that level. So it becomes important to not, you know, anticipate like anybody can learn anything. That simply turns out not to be true. Now, where this plays out more, you know, also is in the lower ranges of intelligence. As you move up, you know, and someone's got an IQ of 100, 110, then it becomes less clear as to how much can someone learn. I mean, we don't have good studies to say you got to have an IQ of 125 to get a PhD. I guarantee you there are all kinds of people with IQs of 100 who have PhDs. So, you know, as you get into these other ranges, it's this 20% or 40%, whatever it is, that kind of takes over. But if you don't have a basic, you know, genetically you didn't get, you know, enough of what we call IQ or intelligence, it does set some limits on how far you can go. When you get to the other extreme, where like we measure somebody as having, you know, a very high degree of intelligence, will they actually do more for society than somebody who has a modest amount, you know, in terms of measured? Well, there's no evidence to that effect. I mean, we have all kinds of people that we don't necessarily see as brilliant who have made tremendous contributions to society, as politicians, you know, as artists, as actors and actresses. So this concept probably is more important at the lower ranges. It's probably there that you do want to realize there are some limits. When you start moving up, you want to realize that 20% or 40%, whatever it is, you know, is really the factor, and we don't know much more after that. But it's an interesting issue to raise. Yes?
Okay, I have a couple things. First of all, the stages with boys, I know my daughter's 10 months old, and I know she's in an oral stage, whatever. Whether that's sexual or not, I don't know, but everything she touches goes in her mouth, so I can see like her going in. And now she's starting to notice her, you know, her private parts and stuff. And I know now because, see, I'm around a lot of children now, that when a child does something inappropriate for, you know, and you're like, what the world's wrong with it? That there's not really anything wrong with them, that that's just, you know, them exploring or whatever, and maybe how to handle it better. And then I kind of rejected the the thought of my daughter. I don't ever remember fantasizing about my dad. However, I will admit that a lot of the guys I dated in the past are similar to my dad, and maybe that's what he was kind of, but the thought of my daughter hating me and wanting to have sex with her father makes me kind of sad, or, you know, I don't want that. So I reject that part.
Well, certainly, and you know, most people rejected this. And again, you want to realize, like, you know, this was an attempt at a theory. And I think, you know, you did a nice job just then of pointing out there are some things in the theory that you can observe. For instance, with your daughter, she does love to put things in her mouth, you know. Why? Because that's the most exciting part of her body right now. So that's, you know, where the nerve endings are, are most sensitive. So she sticks all these things in her mouth because that's really nice. And she's learning. And the problem for mom is that she sometimes puts things in her mouth mom doesn't want to have her do. But she's not really that concerned about putting things in her mouth. She's concerned about stimulating herself, about feeling good. Now, when you make a jump to something like the electric complex, I mean, are all of you doomed to have one of your children hate you because they desire the other parent? Now, this certainly is a metaphor, and it's also a developmental metaphor. So you want to be aware that certainly nobody would buy, the electric complex right now as actually being a developmental stage that everybody goes through. But might there be periods in a child's development where they feel very strongly about bonding with one parent more than another? Probably happens. And it's something that you have to think about. That is, what are you going to do during that stage? You can't help but get upset, by the way. So you shouldn't get harsh on yourself because you find that your child has now reached a point where they're more interested in mom or dad than they are in you. And so if you're mom and they're interested in dad, you can really feel left out. But that is a very common stage. And you want to allow the child to explore that. And certainly the thing that you want to avoid in having studied Freud is to really think that the child actually wants to become sexually involved with the parent of the opposite sex, because if you actually believe that, then you probably will be more cautious about being affectionate. In fact, you might worry if you're a female and you've got a daughter and your daughter is being very affectionate with your husband. You already get enough trouble over the fact that your daughter is paying a lot more attention to your husband than she is to you. But now you might be saying things to your husband like, well, don't be so affectionate with our daughter. I mean, she's going to have problems later because of that. Actually, the opposite is true. If dad is really affectionate with this daughter, this will be good for her. This is kind of her early way of learning how do you be affectionate with a man? How do you hug somebody? How do you feel warm? Is it okay to jump on somebody's lap? And in the home, that's great. That's age appropriate. And a child like that learns a lot of things. She learns it's safe to give in to some of these good feelings. I want to be close to dad. She learns that it's okay to be affectionate. She learns it's okay to be warm. There is no danger in any healthy couple that young child is going to have any problem being molested, certainly by the parent, but also that she's ever going to be molested by anybody else. That is, that she's going to be somehow inappropriate. What she's really learning are very age-appropriate behaviors. And sure.
What I've noticed also is when you have a good relationship with both of your parents, your mother and your father, as a woman, I have a very, very close relationship with my dad. He's not only my best friend, but he's the person that he's a man that I admire and respect very much. And I've noticed that through life, it helped me because I feel so loved from my parents that it prevented me having to date at a very early age or have the need to be loved by third parties. And I mean, I find that to be positive.
Well, and those are very good examples where you find that if there's a lot of warmth at home and you really feel good about both of your parents, you learn a lot from that. You learn how to relate to women, and you learn how to relate to men. You find out there probably are some differences in how you want to do that. But the nice thing is that you feel safe and you feel secure. And a good point you made was that you feel less need to find this outside right away and perhaps be a bit age inappropriate. That's really very good. Okay, what else can you think of here? I mean, what are we learning here about?
I like today the discussion when you said about the late bloomer. And I think that really applies to children on treating them differently because they all mature differently. I've seen that with my sons for sure, that one has always taken life at he's always seemed older and got things quicker, and and the other one seems to be a little bit more mature, and you have to treat them separately and allow them to grow on their own speed.
Yeah. The late bloomer concept really is an important one because, today, when you consider that it is not unreasonable that most of the people in this room may well live to be 90 or older, you don't want to think that whatever choices you're making right now, these are going to define for you what life is going to be like for the next 60, 70 years. You want to feel free that, the choices you're making now are important choices. And they will influence your life without any question. But you do want to have a sense that, as my life develops, I can make some changes. And especially if I'm at a point where I don't know what I want to do. I'm not really content right now with anything I'm doing. And I'm not content with any relationship that I'm in. And I'm not content with the city I live in, and et cetera, et cetera. And if you're really struggling with those kinds of things, then it becomes very important to realize that that's okay. Developmentally, these things come if you really work at them. Now, I wanted to comment on one thing you said, too, that I think, Freud scared people. You were saying, I notice that there are men I'm interested in, and they have a lot of characteristics of my dad. If you really had a nice dad, why wouldn't the men that you get interested in have some of the characteristics of your dad? After all, this is the first person in life, along with your mom, who loved you. This is someone who you grew up with, who perhaps is very affectionate with you. This is maybe the person who taught you math or taught you to read, maybe the person that taught you to golf or to swim. There are all kinds of things that may make you feel, very positively about your dad. So why wouldn't you be attracted to someone like that? And so when you notice those characteristics, that is not the problem.
What about for the people whose dads weren't very nice and they're still attracted to men like that?
I'll finish
Not
this thought.
That's me.
I'll finish this thought, then I'll come back to that. The thing about this is that being attracted to someone like that, is not a problem. In fact, you would anticipate that. The problem becomes when you expect that other person to behave too much like your dad. That is, this other guy looks somewhat like Dad. He's got some of Dad's interests. Now, but he is not Dad. That's the key to this. And where the relationship gets in trouble is when you begin to expect that this guy will react to certain situations like your dad. In fact, you want him to react to those situations. That may mean you haven't spent enough time getting to know him. That is, you've kind of so incorporated some of the maybe superficial things about this person that remind you of your dad that you actually have begun to relate to him as if he was your dad. Now, that is a problem. Now, here we have, you bring up the example, what if you had a bad relationship with Dad? And we do see this, and we find that, someone is still seeking a lover who is like Dad. Well, that is pathological. And the reason that happens often is that one, felt unloved by Dad, and Dad, may have set such high standards and been so punitive that, the woman spends tremendous energy trying to be the good daughter, eventually the good woman. And because she hasn't gotten over that, she seeks people who maybe are similar to Dad as a way of trying to resolve that for herself. That is, of trying to be the loving, good person that she really desires to be. Now, of course, the problem you can see easily, if you choose those kinds of men, you'll never make it, because these are rejecting men. So if you get into that kind of a sphere where you're always dealing with rejecting men, then this pathology will play out for your whole life. I mean, you'll end up in one bad relationship after another. You will end up being disappointed. We have lots of cases like this, by the way. And by the way, for people who get too extreme with this, this is one of the times where people sometimes choose to just give up on life because they can't find anyone and they don't understand the dynamics, that actually the reason things aren't working out is because they are pursuing a pathological end. there may be other people out there, in fact, almost for sure, there are other people out there, if they tried to work out a relationship with, it could be positive. It can never be positive if they keep choosing people who are like Dad. Well, we've gravitated here a bit, towards intimacy, so why don't we talk about some of the things. What other things are there from personality theory that you've seen that make a difference in the way in which you might form relationships or you might avoid relationships? Sure.
I think it's obvious that people have different personalities, but as a human being, we expect a certain person to act a certain way instead of accepting the way that they are and realizing that they're always going to be that way and accepting that personality from them and helping them grow and mature and become a better person with the traits that they have. We want them to be a certain way, and we produce an energy off of us that we end up getting mad at them because they're not the way that we want them to be, yet we're causing those own frustrations for ourselves. So.
Oh, I'm really pleased that you came up with that, because that, if there's anything I hope you've grasped in this, it's the need to recognize how unique other people are. And this point you're making, is so, it happens so often. We see some characteristics in someone. They're desirable characteristics. And so we pursue the person, and we make lots of assumptions. That is not a good way to become intimately involved. That is, it's fine that you make assumptions that somebody is really a terrific person. But the real issue is, if you're going to really know the other person, number one, you got to spend a lot of time with them. Number two, you've got to be open to them, like you were saying. You've got to be open to the idea that this is not me, this is somebody else. And so I have to spend a lot of time with him or her, listening to them, talking to them, becoming familiar with their moods, becoming familiar with their interests, becoming familiar with their aspirations, seeing, do I really have those aspirations? Would I like to do some of the things they want to do? Those things are just really key. And often what creates problems in a relationship is just what you described. And that is that we read too much into the relationship. We're not willing to work on it. Now, which brings me to another point. If we have to put this amount of energy into a relationship, how many truly good friends do you think you can have at one time? 3 or 4, a hand. How many is a handful?
5.
5?
Really
Okay.
online, 3 or 4.
Okay.
Maybe just one.
Maybe just one? What do you think? 2, somebody says.
8.
8? Who said 8? Okay, 8.
But it varies over your age, too.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Like I have a friend that I had in 5th grade, so it's been quite a number of years. And in order to keep that friendship, both of us have had to do a lot of work.
Yes.
Definitely. And in certain times of my life, I've had 8 or 10 friends because we were all doing this similar things with our children, and those friendships may have not lasted as long as this friend that I've had since 5th grade. So you may have in your lifetime 3 really close friends that you have your whole entire life. And then you have a lot of other friends that are on different levels.
Okay. Sure.
I was going to say, my little sister, she's 16, and you will not be able to convince her that she does not have 15 best friends. And I'm like, no, you really don't have 15 best friends. They're not all your close friends. You guys will. No, we are best friends. We're going to be best friends for life. And you could try to tell her until you turn blue in the face. But she thinks she has like 15 to 20 really good friends.
Okay. But now, it becomes important what age someone is at, because that's probably pretty accurate. That is, all of these friendships are probably at, a certain superficial level. They're all genuine. And also, your sister's protected. I mean, if you got 15 of them, you can afford to lose a couple of them. And as you know, usually the loss of an intimate friend, a really intimate friend, is very painful, very, very hard. Now, it wouldn't be so hard if you had 15 of them. So there are some things that are protective, and I think that's probably what she's going through. Sure.
In terms of relationship, is it wise to say, like, I'm not surrounded by lots of, I guess, working relationships that I actually observe that are successful. So usually when I watch it, I'm like, oh, okay, well, he's not going to do this. It's like, you know, you take that idea in your head and you go out and like, well, he can't be that, because I saw that didn't work in that relationship. Is that wise, you know, like just building this ideal person from faulty relationships that you observe?
Well, I think, you know, all of us almost, you know, without having a whole lot of control over it, do build kind of the ideal person. You know, who would I most like to really know and be intimate with? You know, who do I see as kind of a life partner? I mean, I think it's just natural for all of us to begin to look for certain kinds of desirable traits and desirable characteristics in a person. I think the key really becomes whether or not you're willing to explore people and kind of take them as they are if they seem somewhat desirable, and then to really get to know the person. Sometimes, you know, the people you get to know and really care about are not necessarily people that turn you on right away. Sometimes you meet them casually. In fact, one of the reasons sometimes relationships grow is because there was no pressure. You know, you really weren't interested in the person to begin with. They kind of, you know, you kind of liked them, but then as you spend time with them, you begin to find, you know, this is really a neat person, and this person has a lot more interest to me than I ever thought the person would. But you know, trying to get back to your question, so you make observations about your friends, and you say, my friends are making mistakes. I would tell you, pay attention to that. Learn from your friends' mistakes. When you see your friend has gotten herself involved with somebody, and you know you're thinking, this guy's a jerk. You want to ask yourself, first of all, why is she involved with him? And you really might want to ask your friend. You can be very kind to your friend if you know how to do it gently by saying, have you noticed about Mr. Jerk that you know that he doesn't seem to be as good to you as you are to him? But I think, you know, even when you're going through a period where you're observing that, you know, a number of my friends are involved in unsuccessful relationships, and I think they're going to make mistakes, or I see them getting hurt, it's still worth, you know, trying to ask yourself, you know, what do you think went wrong? And actually, it does help you internally to develop a sense of what are the characteristics you would need in someone for you to be willing to really invest a lot of energy in an intimate life. Sure.
This is kind of a different subject, but I was surprised with the trust versus mistrust. I didn't realize that was at such an early stage of development. You know what I mean? I thought that was old when you were older and could understand more. I didn't realize that you're like to become a trusting person, you know, I mean, that was like the first year of your life. You know, so you were so young when you would develop that. I always thought it was something that happened to you when you were older, and then that made you not trust.
Yeah, you know, it's an interesting observation that, you know, if you think back, you know, or you look at today, you look at little children, you know, infants. You know, trust becomes so important that early because you are so dependent. I mean, when you yell, Mom's got to race over there and feed you, or put a blankie on you, or take the blankie off, or whatever it is that the youngster is finding discomfortable. That's not a word, discomforting. And you know, and that does begin to set a certain expectation, even, you know, in a child at 1, about, am I safe in this world? You know, can I trust that good things will happen? And of course, this is the beginning of one's interpersonal life. Can I trust that an important other person, you know, will really take care of me when I need that? Taking care of me being only one variable. But if you think about this, you know, in relationships that are most important to you, there are times when you surely want the other person to take care of you. And that's not regressive. I mean, that's just part of any adult relationship. It's when the other person always has to take care of you that then we have a problem.
I have one more thought.
Sure.
When we learned earlier, now I've got this issue with my daughter as far as if I'm paying too much attention to her, is she going to become the pampered child? And if I, it's like now I'm so worried about, I don't want to do this too much, and you just never know as a parent if you're doing it too much, or if you're going to, if you're not doing it enough or whatever. And the whole neglected child, pampered child.
Well, I think that's true, in parenting for everyone, especially with a first child. You're trying to figure out often, what's the right amount to do. When in doubt, pamper. And I would say that not only about your child, but whoever you're involved with intimately. If you don't know whether you should pamper them or not, pamper them. There's not a lot of danger. Think about it from your own perspective. If you're intimately involved with someone and they're thinking of pampering you, are you thinking, I'm getting too pampered?
But you don't want a little brat either that expects, a car, a brand new Rolls Royce at 15 or whatever.
Depends on whether you can afford it. But see, I think what happens is that with your children, as your children develop, of course, you do have to learn to set limits. That is, you do become the interpreter of the real world to your child. Actually, see, that's why Freud talked about the superego. The development of the superego really was, the parent interpreting the real world to the child. So the child begins to find out there are some things it's not okay to do. And there are some things that we expect you to do. And that part, the child learns from parents, and that's necessary. And everybody develops a superego of some strength. Perhaps not the way Freud described it, but the idea that the world has to be interpreted to children is important. But I would always say in any relationship you're in, whether it's with your child or with your lover, when you want to do something positive, do it. That's the least risky choice you can make. Sure.
I have a question. My children are both in daycare, and when they go into daycare, they have they're not allowed to have pacifiers, and they're not, they have to be good and sit down and everything. But when they get in the car with me, they want to push their limits, and the same thing that you were saying, they want to know what their limits are. Well, they want their pacifiers right when they get in the car, and they want this and they want that. But I'm like, no, wait till we get home, or wait till you get in bed. But it seems like every time I try to do that, my 3-year-old wants it right when my 2-year-old gets it. And I'm like, well, he's still, sort of babyish. You're not. You're supposed to act like a big boy, and he's not doing it.
Oh, yes, but the envy that,
He's like, it's not fair.
Yes, and I remember how nice it was to have, that pacifier, and my little brother here has got it. Why can't I have it? What you might want to think about is that you learn, with children that, by the way, the same is true with adults, of course, we all regress at times. So the child goes off to, and you have them at school for a period of time, and they're expected to be these little adults. And that's very appropriate. I'm sure that, the school set certain limits and they're developmentally appropriate. Then the kid leaves, the kid wants to go back and be younger. That's not a bad thing. It depends on how much of it they want to do. But you see that in kids all the time. And we as adults, set expectations for children, and sometimes it's on the basis of how much energy do we have? It's hard sometimes, not sometimes, it's hard all the time actually, to keep on being as nurturant to young children as you have to be. But you certainly shouldn't get upset if the child shows what we might think of as somewhat regressive behavior, or in the case of these two children, where the older one is clearly jealous of the way in which the younger one is living his life right now. That's fine. Sure.
I have a relative of mine, an aunt, whose little girl comes to play with my little boy very often, and her little girl is very assertive, and I think she sort of raised her where she wants her to be able to stand up for herself, because she feels like, my aunt feels like she wasn't raised that way. She was raised to be very passive and submissive, and she doesn't want her daughter to be that way. So she allows her to, assert her independence and, be very arrogant and aggressive, towards other children. And so when she comes to, my little boy is 2, he'll be 3 in September, and she's already 3. She's they're like a year apart. And the little girl, when she comes over, she wants to play with all of my son's toys, but she doesn't want to play with him. She just wants to play with his toys and, you know, off by herself, and she doesn't share very well, you know, and her mom doesn't really stress to her that that's important at this age. She feels like she'll teach her that later on. And my concern is that we teach my little boy to share at this age, you know, but it makes him feel sort of like confused because he sees that she doesn't have to share, but he does. And I think he may take it as like, you know, he's being bad, you know, because we're having to we correct her sometimes, but her mother doesn't correct her, so a lot of times she still gets away with things, you know, and he sees that. And I was wondering what, you know, what kind of solution could we come up for that, because they are, you know, family and they are relatives, so there's no way they cannot be together, you know.
Well, first of all, you've got a lot of complications. And one of them being that, you know, when you're talking about children at age 2 and 3, you know, I mean, even 6 months of development can be a lot. So that, you know, when a 3-year-old is playing with a 2.5-year-old, there still may be, you know, quite a difference between them. Now, the girl you described sounded like an only child. And okay. So we've got one only child who has been taught to share, and we got one only child who's been taught to take. And the sharing child is now beginning to have some questions about this. And I think that, you know, you want to try to do, it sounds to me like you're doing the right thing. That is, I think at times you should tell, you know, the female child, you have to share here. And especially you have to share his toys with him. And I think that, again, developmentally those phases pass. But you don't want to just let them pass. I mean, you want to use your own best judgment.
But I shouldn't worry, like, I see him picking up, like, of course, you know, his children do that. They pick up other actions they see from other children. So now I see him saying things like to other children, oh, that's mine. Everything is starting to, I know he goes through that phase. He has gone through that phase where things have been his. But we've sort of, you know, gotten him out of that. But now that he's been hanging around his cousin again, he's sort of like, well, that's mine. And he's become very bossy because his cousin bosses him around because she treats him like he's her baby, you know. And
well,
so he's picking up those qualities, and I was concerned, is that going to pass? Should I worry about it? You know, should I? You know?
Well, yes, I would not worry about it. I think that, you know, your child, the way you describe it, is learning some important behaviors. You've already taught him to be sharing. Now he's found that people take advantage of him. So now he's learning to say, you know, that this is mine. Well, that's pretty healthy, actually, you know, that he's being able to, you know, to say there are some of these things that belong to me, and so you need to know that if you're going to use them, you're using my things. You know, I wouldn't worry about that. Then you say the reason why he's become bossy is imitative behavior. He's actually learning this from others, so he starts imitating.
And it's also a defense mechanism, right? Like when, what was it? It's the displacement or whatever. When someone's doing something to you, then you do it to someone else.
Yes, and well, you know, but even in terms of learning, I mean, you know, if certain things get reinforced, then, you know, you'll do them. But I think, you know, you give a great example, you know, of a youngster who is getting lots of encouragement and learning a lot of things from his parents, but the children he plays with are also having a big impact. And that's, you know, the kind of thing that as a parent, I think you're doing the right thing. You have to watch. You have to ask yourself questions about, you know, is this good? But a lot of this stuff is very developmentally appropriate. I mean, developmentally, this is what happens. But when you're concerned, you know, always the best thing is, you know, you talk with your child and you try to reward your child always for the things that he or she does that you want them to do. I mean, over time, children really do learn, as the rest of us do, you know, that we respond to things we're rewarded for. Okay, what else now then? What do you think is the percentage, well, maybe percentage is not, what do you think is the amount of energy, or maybe percentage of energy, you should put into work, that is to the job you will have, versus the percentage of energy you need to put into your intimate life?
Greater percentage in intimate life.
Okay, greater percentage into intimate life, okay?
Like 70-30.
70-30, okay, yes?
Which has the greater reward.
Okay. Very important, okay? Very important point, yes. You know, he has said, depends on, you know, what is the greater reward. Now, what do you think should have the greater reward? Okay. See, all the women are saying intimate life. Okay, maybe different things at different times.
It depends on what you value at that moment.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have children, so I'm ready to make the money until I do. So I would put more of my energy into establishing myself and everything. And then when I hear that biological clock or what have you, then I will start going that way, probably. But I don't know. I mean, not at all. In this class, I've diagnosed myself with everything short of schizophrenia.
Well, you know, okay, but it's a good point. You know, a couple of you have said it depends on, you know, where you're at in your life, and that does make a difference. Now, what do you think, you know, will happen if you put a disproportionate amount of your energy into work?
It'll upset your intimate life.
Pardon that, what?
It'll upset your intimate life. You have to, when you're at home and you're in your intimate life and with your children, you have to be at home with your children and your husband and your spouse or whatever. And when you're at work, you have to be at work and focused on work. It has to be 100% work while you're there, and it has to be 100% intimate life while you're at home and in your life.
See, that's the thing. The percentage is that you really want to put, you know, in an ideal way. You want to put all of yourself into your work life because you're going to work a long time, unless you happen to be independently wealthy. Most of us, perhaps all the people in the room here, we are all going to work a long time. So you want to put a lot of energy into that, and you want to be creative and you want to grow. Same thing is true of the intimate relationships that you have. If you don't put a lot of energy into it, and in fact, what you see in some stereotypes where people marry because their marriage helps their job, that doesn't work for very long. The person who is the receiver in that situation tires of that soon. But you know, in working, one does need to realize that it absorbs a lot of your time, it absorbs a lot of your energy, and you really want to be aware that you want to leave work at work. That's real easy to say, by the way. I want to be very clear, but a lot of relationships get hurt by the inability of a person to leave work there, and when they come home, they're still so involved in work that they have no time for the other person. That is, they want the other person to let them process what happened at work. Now, in healthy relationships, and in today's world where most partners, both people are working, this can be healthy if each of you listen to each other. But if only one person is being listened to, the other person gets bored pretty soon. Well, I do want you to know, for me, it's been fun to teach this class, and I do want you to recognize that there is a lot of material that we covered. And I would tell you, for those of you who go on and take more psychology courses, you will find this material will repeat, and you will be glad you learned it here, and you'll find it takes on new dimensions as you look at it from different perspectives. And I hope that some of you get a chance to have a vacation before the next semester starts. Okay.